Hello, welcome back to D1 Rejects Recruiting Report, powered by Alfonso Voltaggio at Suburban Ford of Romeo. We've talked about him, D2 football product, proud Saginaw Valley alum. He's been supporting this show and what we've been doing to bring some light to these small school products. These guys going from the high school level in Southeast Michigan on to the collegiate level, whether that be D2, D3, a lot of these big-time small school products. But today, it feels like it's all come down to this, in that if you're a class of 2025 athlete in this high school cycle, signing day is just weeks away, and there's so many people that are trying to figure things out, and it feels like this is crunch time for when you need to determine where you're going to spend the next 4 or 5 years, or how you're going to get your foot in the door when it comes to the college football landscape. Pretty stressful time for student athletes and families. What do they need to know about navigating through this time of January going into February?
Well, it's awesome to be back. Kobe, we're so close. I always really enjoyed signing day as a coach, getting a chance to see these young players achieve a goal that was, set in front of them. But then I'm looking back at this picture on my desk. I'm thinking about Alfonso, and I'm thinking about how much they changed from the time they signed to the time they became seniors. Not only just physically in the growth and getting in the weight room and all those different things, but emotionally, mentally, the leaders that they became. I think about Jeremiah Johnson from Notre Dame Prep and the growth that he had in his senior year coming off an ACL injury and being able to lead our team really back to a prominent state as a national contender. I think about what Alfonso himself helped us to kind of navigate some really tough seasons. So as cool as signing day is, it's really about the next step. And sometimes that gets lost in the world of recruiting, of social media, even the things that we've talked about. As important as those topics are, you've got to put yourself in a position to be at a program, develop yourself. And I always encourage people to do one thing. I think it's really important. Find some benchmarks to kind of aspire to in that first year. Now, there might even be some prospects that listen to this that are already enrolled. Early enrolling is such a big thing, even at the Division II level. It's crazy to think that. That's more of a norm now. I talked to 2 families this week that have their sons that are already playing college football at a Division II school this semester. But the thing is, put benchmarks in front of you so you don't get kind of lost in the ocean. I always talk a little bit about that first camp, right? You're going through your first camp. Just make it through camp from the standpoint of staying engaged and excited and thinking about getting a little bit better for that 2-week period or however long your camp is. For the kids that are already enrolled, maybe it's getting through that spring camp. I talk a lot about then from there, get to that bye week or kind of maybe halfway through the season. Find a way to stay engaged. Maybe you're playing on the scout team. Maybe you don't feel that same love that you got when you were going through the recruiting process, thinking about being a starter and an All-American and those NFL jerseys that they show you. And you're like, whoa, I'm playing on scout team. Get to that bye week. And then from there, obviously you've got the end of the season and finals. And if you can get yourself to that point with energy of looking at those 3 benchmarks, I think it can really allow you to set yourself up for success in that first year, which the first year is critical.
No, I think that's big, and I think that one piece of that often gets lost is you see people that love the welcome to the NFL moment or welcome to college football moment, and sometimes you get that. I remember mine coming in my freshman year, catching a swing pass and knocking the helmet off of our starting strong safety down the sideline, and from there on out, I get treated quite a bit differently by some of the guys, going through that spring kind of semester. Not everyone gets a moment like that, but you're going to have little moments that start to build into that. And I think it's important. You talk about going through with energy and keeping that same kind of perseverance and that same attitude about these long-reaching goals that you have. How do you, throughout the course of that experience in that first year as a student athlete, when you get to these checkpoints, whether that be after fall camp, halfway through the season, how do you sit down and kind of look in the mirror and be reflective about where you sit in relation to those long-term goals and how you kind of measure up to see where you stack up and how close you are to achieving it?
Well, the first thing I tell people is actually remember what you went through in the recruiting process. The ups and downs now of the recruiting process in a lot of cases can mimic a career. You start out going through the recruiting process as maybe after your sophomore year, you're getting this Division I interest, you're riding high, you're thinking this is awesome, I'm going to play at my dream school. And then you go through camps, then you go through your junior year, and maybe some of that interest subsides, and you find yourself a great Division II, Division III NAIA program. But those swings and those ups and downs can be tough to navigate. But when you're going through freshman year, I try to tell people, harken back to those memories. Remember what it's like kind of having the ups and downs. Camp. Year 1 is a lot like that. There's going to be some times you're like, this is the greatest thing ever. There's going to be sometimes you're like, I want to get in the car and go home. That's natural for everybody at every level. So I actually try to tell people to remember the recruiting process. That's one of the big misnomers in the recruiting process in general. People think the recruiting process is about getting to signing day. And I'm excited for signing day. I think it's really cool. But that's one day out of a journey that kind of has about 400 or 500 different check marks, like we talked about, that are going to be awesome. Some that are going to be challenging, and then you're going to have to overcome. But you've done it for a year and a half in many cases. So remember that. But the one thing I will say that you kind of want to start to re-engineer a little bit is kind of that need for attention that the recruiting process does create. So in some ways, you want to remember going through it. But in another case, when you get yourself to a point where you've made your decision, you've signed a scholarship letters, or you've made your decision on the Division III school that you want to go to, there is a part where you have to kind of re-engineer yourself, not needing all that attention that you're trying to find in the recruiting process as you're feeling it out, trying to know if they're interested. Are they going to offer me? Trying to make sure you stay relevant. When you get yourself to a place, that's the one part of the process that I want you to kind of change, not forget, not say that you never have to do it, but you don't need to feel that attention or expect all that attention from your coach on a weekly basis, and sometimes maybe even on a camp basis or a semester basis. Be cautious as far as how much you feel the need to kind of reach out and grab that attention when you're there, but also don't forget going through the recruiting process. There's a lot to lean on that will help you get through that career, not just your first year.
Yeah, going from starter to scout team is not exactly an easy adjustment, and that's the step and the branch out that a lot of these guys take coming out of the high school level. Because when you're talking about the upper echelon of these Division II and Division III NAIA programs, there's not a lot of dudes that are coming out of high school and starting on these teams, especially in the day and age of the transfer portal, where you have someone who come in there and develop for a couple years just to have pretty callous way of looking at it, but just to have their spot taken by someone who's proven themselves at a higher level. So I think that's a really important piece that obviously you want to make sure that you're getting that evaluation and that criticism constructively from your coaching staff, because they always say that you should start worrying when they stop giving it to you. But definitely important just as much to put your head down and continue to work on yourself and to be a critical piece of that team, because eventually at the end of the day, that's what you're measured on.
But compete. Don't lose hope. Like you said, hey, they bring in a transfer. Awesome. This player is going to make me better. Yeah. They're going to make me raise my level. And who knows? Maybe you beat them out. I think that is getting lost in this world, especially at the Division II or Division III level. A little bit of the woe is me. They're going to bring a transfer in. Let's do this. And I'll never forget Coach Smith telling me when I was playing, he's now at Ferris State with multiple national titles, rings on his finger. He said, the great players want the transfers to come in because they want to raise their level. Mm-hmm. He said it to me because I was like, oh, I can't wait just to have this spot handed to me. And he said, the great ones want the competition. So go embrace the competition. Don't just hope for it to happen to you. Go out and take advantage of it.
Absolutely. To stay on that tangent too, you look at, people love to look at, the best wide receiver rooms, the best running back rooms in college football, the best defensive secondaries. It's no coincidence that these guys were playing together at the college level and then went on to have great NFL careers. That same could be said at the lower level in college, because these guys are playing around each other nonstop. They're sharpening each other throughout every day in practice, putting their minds together and then physically pushing themselves, which is a big part of it. But let's talk about a group of guys that will be making that jump this fall and what we think are going to be some big-time playmakers at the D2 level, respectively here. Suburban Florida Romeo presents today's list of elite high school talent in Southeast Michigan and beyond. Let's start with a quarterback going up to meet up with the Bulldogs in Ferris State.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about Sante Gasperoni out of Lasalle, coached by Dan Roan, who is not, unfamiliar with championship level football, developing players that have gone on. And now Sante gets to go into the Harlan Hill factory. That is the quarterback room at Ferris State. I mean, it almost feels plug and play for the Harlan Hill as far as players that go in there. And it's not everybody is going to achieve that status, but whoever comes out on top, I hope it's him as far as his competitiveness, his ability to go in there and want to win the job. But what's really interesting about Sante is he will drive the ball from the pocket. He has some athleticism to get out, but I didn't see a whole lot of nonstop designed, called out of the pocket throws. And that to me is pretty exciting. But what I think is going to be very interesting for him, it's got a little bit of a unique release. So can he take that and apply it to what Ferris does? Can he take the pounding when he does get asked to run? Because again, I didn't see him super mobile, but for him to be able to run some of the Q counter stuff that Ferris likes to do, you know he's going to be prepared from a competition standpoint. He played in one of the best leagues in the state of Michigan, coached by Coach Roan, who knows what it takes to get to the highest level of your ceiling as a player. Will he go in there? Will he be able to make all the throws? Will he be able to go in there and take the pounding? I think that'll ultimately determine his ceiling, but I'm extremely excited to see a kid from, again, one of the premier programs in the state go in there to now just a perennial national title contender into a room that kind of expects Harlan Hill level performance. A lot to ask from him. I hope he's up for the challenge.
Yeah, very high bar there. Trinidad finishing second in the Harlan Hill voting this year after a phenomenal season with Ferris State, one in which he did it very much with his legs and with his arm there. He's proven a lot of that, and there's going to be a need to find the next Trinidad, or maybe the first Sante in this case, right? And you have time where there's going to be a talented, very intelligent quarterback in that room with a lot of football IQ that can hopefully pass on a lot of those traits to the next up-and-coming, whoever that ends up being. But to shift the scope over from the GLIAC over to the GMAC a little bit further south in a conference that is made up of some very high-level football teams in the state of Michigan as well. Talk about Ben going up to Hillsdale, up to the O-line there.
Well, I'm very fortunate to be able to talk a little bit about Ben Burgess from Coopersville, because I don't think anybody does a better job developing their players than Ed Kamen from Coopersville High School. You know, what they've been able to do. And listen, this is no shot at Coopersville High School in the 90s. They've had some pretty good players. I played against a few of them. This place has become an O-line factory. I mean, we just talked a little bit about Ferris being the Harlan Hill factory at the quarterback position. You're talking about year after year Division I players going to play at the highest level. And when I watched Ben's film, I immediately text Ed and I was like, this kid is unbelievable. He might be the nastiest of all the guys he's had. Now, maybe he lacks a little bit from a couple inches at height here or there, but his ability to go over and play at Hillsdale and be physical, snap at the second level. Now, it's one thing to sit here and say, like, all right, you can knock somebody down and you're gapping down on a 3 technique. His ability to combo and snap on linebackers at the second level is as good as anybody I saw this entire year. He reminds me of a young Brandon Barnes from the great Grand Valley programs. Now, Brandon was a left tackle. I don't know if Ben has that length to play left tackle, because Brandon was not super tall, but he had extremely long arms. I don't know if I see that in Ben, but I think as a guard, if they can work with him at center, he might be the best I've seen from a technique standpoint. Ed gets a lot of credit for that. Coopersville High School in the program and their O-line coach get a lot of credit for that, but incredibly nasty, almost like, and I had to put this in parentheses here in a second when I wrote it down. It's almost like he's trying to hurt people legally. Mm-hmm. And now that's what you want at the O-line. Oh, yeah. Between the whistles, I am trying to knock people down, open up running holes for the Hillsdale running back. I think you're going to see a kid who's going to step in and play really early. And we've talked about a few of those guys this year on these podcasts. He might be the best I've seen. Extremely excited. I think Hillsdale does a phenomenal job, even with the coaching transition over the last couple of years with the new coach taking over for really a legendary coach. The reality is, I think he fits exactly what they're going to do. Would not be shocked to see Hillsdale be kind of right in that premier position, dominating the GMAC and potentially in a position to play in the playoffs.
They certainly have. They've been up and down, but they've pulled off some incredible upsets the last couple of years as well. I mean, beating Ashland in recent memory comes to mind as kind of an upset victory for those Chargers. And the consistency, obviously, I'm sure all of them in that building would tell you that, but the skill level and the competitiveness is obviously there. But go down to the Division III level, still in the state of Michigan. Talk to me about one of the biggest additions to that offensive skill room at Adrian.
Yeah, Austin Kersey is from Detroit Catholic Central, is really interesting. Now, he's listed as a running back, but I actually think he could do a lot of things. We've talked about a good amount of these players this year that kind of have that skill set where they could play in the backfield on offense. They could play nickel. They could play spin down safety. And he kind of fits into that old school 90s mode, in my opinion, when I watched his film, where he looks like that guy that's going to move inside, right? When you used to talk about the great the great Florida State teams of the 90s, they would go and they would recruit bigger safeties that they could move down to linebackers and they could absolutely run. And that was what you saw in the 90s out of Florida State. This is a kid that kind of reminds me out of that. Now, coming out of Detroit Catholic, again, competition out of the Catholic League, he's prepared for anything. Coach Sante and what he's been able to do there. I'm not saying Detroit Catholic was down by any means, but I think he's kind of brought them back to a resurgence where it's like, whoa, this team's going to be a force to be reckoned with. This could be another one of those 4 or 5, 6 year runs where it's Detroit Catholic and Cass Tech playing each other. Those were some unbelievable games in the mid 2000s for the state championships. Almost seemed like year in and year out. Austin kind of fits that mode where I think he could move and play on either side of the ball and show that physicality with enough explosiveness once he gets into that strength and conditioning program. He kind of reminds me of a former teammate of mine, Pat Cavanaugh, out of Bishop Foley, that did that. Now, this was back in the early 2000s, spin down safety, stopping the ISO run was really big. But in the RPO world, in the Q counter world, when you're going up against a Ferris, you need that. You need these kids who can kind of grow. They've got speed, they've got explosiveness, and kind of grow into positions where they can play closer to the box. I'm not saying he's going to be a middle linebacker. Not saying he's going to be the next Dark Angelo when he was a really good player, the older Dark Angelo when he was a really good player at Ferris. But the reality is I think he could fit into that kind of a mold. And I'm really excited to see him grow and develop. He could kind of be one of those wow players. I think it's going to take him a few years to develop. So if he makes those steps, I could really see him having a huge impact in this league in a few years.
Absolutely. Let's stay in the GMAC. Over to Tiffin, a team that has been at the top of that conference, vying for conference titles just the last couple of years here. The Dragons picking up a quarterback out of St. Mary's.
Yeah, Axel Newell out of St. Mary's going to Tiffin. Now, this is really interesting. As I was kind of making some notes, very unique three-quarter delivery that Alex has. Now, what you normally will see out of those deliveries, that's really good for teams that run the air raid and the RPO stuff. But I didn't exactly see that out of his film at St. Mary's. Okay, I didn't exactly see him running those type of schemes. So I think this could be a very much a feast or famine, or a, hey, Gliac, why did you miss me? Or is it really going to work? Is he going to be able to click? Is he going to be able to fit into that Tiffin offense with that, technique and some of that skill set that I think he's going to have to work on? But with how heavily recruited Orchard Lake St. Mary's is and will continue to be, how did not more Gliac teams get in on him? Mm-hmm. How were not more teams beating down his door to have him even be a second or third quarterback to come in and compete and see if he can overcome, again, not what I'm saying is flaw, but I think a skill set that fits, get the ball out quick, run some RPOs, play in that style of a system. Tiffin might have got a steal by coming up here, and they've done a very nice job recruiting the state from my perspective over the last year. Coach comes down from Saginaw Valley, takes over. Maybe he's got some of those connections. Good on them. And again, this is kind of what you need to do. Tiffin had always been kind of percolating right there, right? A couple of years ago, they were in the mix. Then they kind of are right there. Could this be the kid who kind of is that breakout player? I'd be really interested to see what he can do, because he's prepared based on the competition level that he came from out of high school.
Absolutely. And to finish it off, back in the Gliac, we've highlighted a lot of Warriors on this show, especially in the offensive side of the ball. Another big addition to that front at the tight end position for Wayne State.
Well, I was hoping you were going to introduce Andrew so we could see who could say his last name the most correctly. But I will say this about Wayne State. I'm probably going to give them my 5-star rating as far as the work that they've done. All these players have to develop. But from what I've seen, there is a very good balance of players that could come in and help Coach Wheatley get this thing turned. Some of the first players we talked about on this podcast were Wayne State commits. I am really interested and excited to see how they develop. Andrew Pazuchowski out of Grosse Pointe South.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I have him listed as a tight end DN. I think he is a prototypical dominant defensive end in the Gliac. There are some things about him where maybe he doesn't quite have that bend, or what you might be looking for, like the old school Matt Judon, right? Yeah. Who was coming out of West Bloomfield and could dip an edge and get sacks and all those different things. I'm not sure if you see that, but there is a physicality. There is an explosiveness in there. Reminds me a lot of another one of my teammates, Joe Herman, also from the Grosse Pointe area. He played at Grosse Pointe North. But the reality is, he reminds me a lot of one of those big physical players that while you can't live and die setting the edge, you saw enough of the RPO and quarterback read action where he had to get wide, set his feet, and be ready to play back on the dive or play off on the quarterback. Not exactly triple option read, but enough of that where I think there's some sneaky athleticism in there. And when he gets in his stance, he just looks like a dude. And sometimes that's part of it. Feeling confident, getting in that three-point stance, getting off the ball and just knocking that tackle back, or aggressively pushing the edge on a pass rush. I think he could really be a standout player in this class. Maybe no one's talking about him because Wayne State has to put themselves into that Grand Valley Ferris situation before people think they're a big-time recruit. I think this kid's sneaky good. I think Wayne State did a great job in their class. Now they got to develop them. You found the players. You put yourself in position. Now it's on you coaches to go out there and get them ready to go out and do the things that you see, that me and you also see, Kobe, on film. And I know that the kids are excited to go and put themselves in those positions too. I think Andrew's going to be a really good fit at Wayne State.
Yeah, high praise for the Warriors in that class coming in. They've obviously got a lot of room to improve, and I mean, this year is going to be critical for Wheatley and his staff over there to see, from an outside perspective, you're going to have to eventually see progress, see very tangible progress in the terms of wins and losses and the quality of these games and competitive nature. And this feels like that this class should be a step in the right direction. And like you said, though, there's still a lot of time between now and August.
No, there is. And the reality is this is still similar to, I think, when you look back at the 90s, early 2000s, where kind of year 3 and 4, you would kind of expect that jump. I mean, you saw Coach Brady do it when he took over for Coach Collins. They've really been, I think, kind of set their footing where they want. And I think they're on their trajectory now. You've seen what Coach Metlack has been able to do up at Michigan Tech. I think Coach Richardson at Northern Michigan is going to be really close at setting his foundation. I think this is the most interesting year in the GLIAC coming up. You've obviously got a team going for 4 national titles out of the last 5 years. You've got a Grand Valley team that is trying to get back there, and it's been a while since they've even played for a national title, but has those aspirations. Can Saginaw Valley get in the mix? Can some of these young coaches take those next steps with their programs like they're trending to do? And these players are all ready to sign and be a part of it. I'm pretty fired up. It's only February in a week. But it's like, when does the season start? Let's get rolling. Let's see these kids cut it loose, man. I can't wait for the season already.
Absolutely. You got a different field in 2025 with Conference Carolinas sponsoring football this year, what sounds like an expanded playoff field at the D2 level. So there's going to be a lot more question marks when it comes down to that. We're talking like November, and we're getting, a little bit ahead of ourselves. But remember to go see the Pride of Utica Eisenhower today at Suburban Ford of Romeo. Talk to our guy Fonz about getting you in a new Ford. And much thanks again to him for helping us get these going. But thanks to you as well, Dan. I appreciate it.
This is awesome. Can't wait to talk again.
Absolutely. I'll see you.